So today's session is with John Latham-Mollart, who you'll see on your screens. John's a research, governance and ethics lead at Arcturis Data Limited, which is a company which works with real-world health data. It's really good to have John here today. I'm not going to say much more. So I'm going to let John talk with us about how Arcturis works, what he does, the data, the benefits, and to patients and to the NHS. So a nice open session. So I'm thinking it's going to be a really interesting session. We've got lots of people registered still, people arriving as I'm clicking through. So John, maybe you could introduce yourself. I'll leave the floor to you and you can take the floor from here.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I just want to say a massive thank you for very much taking the time on a Friday morning to come and listen to myself and hear about what we're doing at Arcturis. It's actually lovely to see many familiar faces, both from the PPI work I've done and also professionally over the years. I do have a bit of a slide deck, which I'm not overly familiar with Zoom, but I'm going to make an attempt to share screen now. Okay, lovely. So yes, as Chris mentioned, I'm here today to talk about how we at Arcturis as a commercial research company go about the business of using anonymized patient data in a responsible way, or what we think is a responsible way, for patient benefit. So the first thing I want to do is really I need a bit of an introduction to myself. So I'm John Latham-Mollart. I've been a research governance and information governance professional for the best part of the past decade. And through quirks of fate, just being in the right place at the right time, I've tended to work on large-scale national and international research initiatives across various different sectors. So I started out as a researcher working on the National Patient Survey Programme, which was a partnership between the Picker Institute and the Care Quality Commission, helping run patient experience surveys looking at adult inpatient care, children and young people, and mental health. And then from there, I decided I wanted to commit to governance, risk and compliance in a bit more of an earnest way. And then from there went to the University of Oxford just at around about the time of the pandemic. And then I got heavily involved. I was part of the coordination team for the recovery COVID-19 treatments, which was responsible for data linkage across the 4 nations. And then latterly on the COVID infection survey, which was with the University of Oxford, the ONS, which many of you may have been involved in. The experience that I got there then led me into the civil service, where I worked for CPRD, the Clinical Practice Research Data Link, as part of their research data governance lead. And then from there, an opportunity came available closer to home to work within a commercial sector at Arcturis, which is where I've been since November of 2023. The other thing that's a little bit interesting is I've had a patient lived experience myself. And around about the time I was running the adult inpatient survey for the Picker Institute, I ended up in hospital myself with very aggressive bacterial pneumonia. And as another quirk of fate, the timing was such they ended up sampled for my own adult inpatient survey. So I have that unique exposure to research, both as the researcher and as the participant, as the patient participant. And I'm not a big believer in fate, but I do believe that you've got to bring all of your lived experience to the job that you do. And that's what's led me to the research governance and ethics job that I do at the moment. That's enough about me. Let's talk about Arcturis. So standard thing that we would send to clients or to anyone who we're introducing Arcturis to is that we work in partnership with NHS trusts, secondary care hospitals, to use the real world data that's routinely collected through patients' treatments they receive in hospital for the benefit of public and patients through working with pharmaceutical clients to develop new drugs and treatments and their adoption. We do this in 4 main ways. There are 4 main facets to the business. One is that we feel our data is much different compared to other sources of data and patient data that's used for real world data. Ours is incredibly rich and incredibly detailed, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. And it's a type of data, both structured and unstructured, which is extremely difficult to get to. We can get to it because we form very close relationships with NHS trusts, and we work very much in partnership through funding agreements and strategic multi-year deals and plans to try and connect these data silos that exist within NHS organizations so that really hard to get to and hard to appreciate data can be surfaced and can be used for research purposes to support the pharmaceutical industry. But the data is not enough. So we work very closely with clinicians and increasingly more recently patients and the public to try and contextualize that data so that our understanding of the data is appropriate and that we don't make an assumption about the data based on what we think it means. We bring experts, patient experts and clinicians in to help us understand it. And also the third element is the analytics. We've got a phenomenal team of medical statisticians and data scientists who can take these different types of data and different structures of data and put them into a standardized format, what we call it a common data model, so that they can be more easily analyzed. And that's the key element of what we do. And then the final thing is our real world evidence team work very, very closely with our pharma clients to understand the data and provide the answers that they need to be able to progress in their drug development cycle. That explains what we do. And to get into a little bit more detail about that, the types of data that we access are incredibly rich, as I've said. And so they go beyond what is simply encoded, what you would find in a spreadsheet or in a database. We can also access, and we also use unstructured types of data such as X-rays, imaging, and unstructured data, the type of data that you'd find in free text comments, where 80% of real-world data exists, but is incredibly difficult to get to. The why we do this and the why I get up in the morning and why I'm working with Arcturis is we do what we do ultimately to benefit patient care. That's what pharmaceutical industry is trying to do. That is what they're endeavoring to do, because there's no point building a treatment, an intervention that has no benefit, that will not be a benefit, that will not be accepted by NICE. There has to be a very, very tangible burden of disease that you're looking to make an improvement in. And so very much our starting point is patient care. We use the real world data that's come from routinely collected data through patients' hospital managed treatment pathways, and we support the pharmaceutical industry in that drug development cycle. And it goes round in a circular fashion. And we use various different statistical techniques and analytical models to support that work. That's covered off and sort of sets the scene in terms of what we do. But what we're going to do is saying what we do, what I do in terms of research governance and ethics. And I'm going to sort of take you back to the start when I joined Arcturis back in November 2023 and the job that was presented to me. So the starting point is you really got to look at what the research governance ethics landscape looks like in terms of health research in the UK and the uses of patient data. At last count, there are about 25 different bits of legislation, regulation, and policy which dictate how patient data should be used or cannot be used. My job as a practitioner working within a commercial setting is to look at that infinite number of things that we may do and make a judgment call about what is important, what is the stuff that we've got to do. And I frame them in terms of the must, the shoulds, and the mays. So the must is the absolute requirements. You've got to do this. As a commercial organization, you are often legally bound, regulatory bound to do these things. And that can be relatively straightforward. Then you're into the shoulds. And these is more of the ethical judgment side of my job in going, what of policy and good practice is it that we should be adopting to do the right thing by our stakeholders or interested parties, of which patients of the public are one. But understanding some of those good practices may not always apply to our setting, or they're just too burdensome. They will hinder us in being able to deliver on that patient benefit, that client expectation. And then understanding what of it is entirely optional. And then once we've gotten that and we've worked out this is what's important, this is what's less important, we then need to contextualize it and understand where it's applicable. So if we're given a worked example, you have stuff like the UK GDPR and the common law duty of confidentiality, absolute requirements of law, but they apply when the data is identifiable, when it's personal data. When data is rendered anonymous or it's in an anonymous format, those legal duties don't apply. So you could look at that and go, well, I don't need to worry about anything. But that would be extremely foolish if we then didn't continue protecting the data with an equivalence to those legal standards. And that's where that judgment comes in. And once you've got done through that stage, you think, right, I've got it now to know what I'm going to be working on, how we're going to do it. You've then got to decide how best to apply them. And then that is the real art of my work, which is how do we, as a small SME organization, meet these requirements in a way that is most efficiently burdensome for us, but generates the required level of compliance or generates the required level of benefit. And part of that is taking that infinite space and distilling it down into a framework that's quite easy to understand and can be universally appreciated. And then from there, in my early stage at Arcturis, I was looking for a framework. I wanted to find something where I could string and hang this all together. And because I'm quite a lazy person. I don't like reinventing the wheel. I was looking for an existing framework, something that already existed out there. And it led me to the UK Stats Authority's ethical principles. And as soon as I saw it, I looked at that and I thought, that looks really, really close. That's about right. And when I took a bit more of a deep dive, I thought that is a roundabout quite appropriate. That touches on and addresses many of the requirement and expectations all of our interested parties, regulators, patients and the public, our trusts, our clients are going to expect us to do. The other thing that I liked about it is that it's extremely practicable. So those ethical frameworks come with a self-assessment tool, Excel spreadsheet that takes a deep dive into each of those 6 areas. And it was presented an opportunity whereby we can tangibly benchmark our research activity and what we do against an external standard, against the Data and Statistics Authority's own ethical principles. And so from there, we adopted it. We took it in earnest, made about a couple of changes just to adapt it to our context. And I went to the board and said, this is what I think we should be doing. And it got board approval. I said, John, brilliant. That's your ethical framework. Go forth and implement it. And that leads me next to the next stage of the presentation, which is tangibly talking about what did we do? How did we take these principles, these way in which we wanted to work and tangibly embed it into our working practice? For me, that's a critical element of my work, because if we just had these abstract principles that we didn't do anything with, we're open to challenge. There's nothing demonstrable that we can bring forward to say, you know, we actually put it into practice and what we do is trustworthy. It has to be practically implemented. So what we did is we take these ethical principles and we built a system of working around them. And it's what we came up with was what's called the Arcturis Real World Data Network, or RWD network. And what it is what's called a research database. This is a particular type of research structure that you can apply and get HRA, research ethics and confidentiality advisory legal support for. And it's simply classified as a structured collection of data to be used for multiple research purposes. And that's it in earnest. The scope of our work of the research database is to support the internal and commissioned research that we do ourselves, but also with clients. It has to have clear patient benefit, has to be demonstrable, and it has to be within the field of hospital managed treatment pathways. And we can apply this real world data network, this way of working, only to anonymized structured and unstructured data, but in any disease and treatment area. Now, from a commercial setting, that's quite powerful. Many of our other competitors focus purely on oncology and the study of cancers. We can place our way of working and look at any disease or treatment area, provided it fits within the scope of what we do. The easiest way I can explain what we do is sort of visually walk you through it. So our system of control defines very clear processes and procedures that cover the end-to-end delivery of our work. So they touch on things that NHS trusts must or should do to support this work, and also the way in which we work with clients. So if I start from left to right, we form data sharing agreements or strategic research agreements with NHS organisations. And part of that is the provision of anonymised patient data that we can then access and perform our analysis on and help standardise it. Critical to the framework was what we call our least access methodology. And it was the idea that wherever it was possible and practicable, we would have as least level of access to the data as possible, as we could manage. And we do it in 3 ways. One way is we don't, the ultimate ideal is that we don't even see the data if we can, and we use a method called federated analysis, where we submit our analytical queries, our analytical code, directly to the database that's held at the trust, and we only receive aggregated statistics, counts, proportions, that kind of thing. That kind of technology and that way of working is very much in its infancy, and will get better over time. So more often than not, what we tend to do is work under data access principles. What you'll have heard is sort of trusted research environments and secure data environments. And in that instance, anonymized data is provisioned into an NHS secure data environment, and me remotely access into it. In this context, we can see the data, but there's very tight controls about how it is released to us. Often it is all of the outputs are checked before they're released, and then to make sure there's nothing explosive in them. Around about 40% of the work that we do is in that mode, of the type of the data we access is in that mode. And the other 60% is in traditional data sharing. And in that instance, only anonymized data is shared with us. All of the anonymization is done by staff at the NHS Trust. Arcturis never accesses any of the identifiable data. And when it is shared directly to us, it comes into our what we call our high compliance system, which is protected to international and domestic levels of information security. Moving more towards the right, the critical thing that our model does is we ourselves don't operate as a TRE. Clients come to us with their questions. We undertake the analysis to answer those questions, and all that goes back to the client is the answer. No anonymized data or no individual level anonymized data goes back to the client. All we provide is the real world evidence and the insights that they need to answer their question. And again, that is a slightly different way in which we work from our competitors. And how we got there was our real world research governance and ethics framework. It was tangibly incorporated into what the real world data network had to do. The real world data network exists to satisfy the requirements of our framework, and through the work I've done, we've made sure that that framework supports the commercial endeavors of the business. And this is how I feel we've been able to make the research governance, the ethics, and the commercial not mutually exclusive. They are one in the same. What I'm going to do for the final sort of 5 minutes of my presentation is take a little bit of a deep dive into two of these particular pillars of our framework. So the first one is the nature of public good. This is the idea that the use of the data that we access has clear benefits for users and serves the public good. The user bit is relatively straightforward and easy to achieve because clients come to us with their questions, we look at it and we go, yes, we can do it, or no, we can't. And that's relatively easily met. The one that's slightly more difficult to reconcile sometimes is the public good. How do we reconcile and we achieve that there's public good? So within our real world data protocol, a lot of this is direct take verbatim from that protocol, which we are bound to the HRA as a regulator to do. So whenever you see in these quotations, it says this must be done, the regulator has signed off to say you are going to do it every time. So the way in which we assess public good is we leverage the work that's been done by the National Data Guardian on how you assess public good versus commercial interest. And there's three facets to our assessment. So the very first part is that the research project that the client would like us to do demonstrates that it has a clear benefit to either the population as a whole or a patient subset. And we need to see that there first. The next bit is that, yes, it's demonstrable, but is it realistic to achieve? Sometimes research comes through and says, oh, yes, there's marvelous public good. But when you actually get into the reads of it and understand the methodology, what's expected, it may not be feasible. And so doing that research project, yes, you can do the research project, you're doing fine, but the downstream benefit that you want to realize for patients of the public may be intangible. It might be a bit possible. That's not good enough for us. There has to be a decent likelihood that this benefit that they say their research is going to have is actually materialize further down the line. But that's not enough. It's not just enough to say, oh, yes, there's patient benefit. We have to understand what is the downside of potentially doing this? What is the harms that could potentially arise? So we consider in doing this research, are there any undesired effects that are going to arise? And provided by the end we've gone through those three stages, we end up in an overall net benefit, we're going to proceed. The critical thing is that assessment is undertaken by myself and the wider research oversight subcommittee at Arcturis, which I'll explain a bit more about how that works in a sec. If it's in our judgment that there isn't sufficient public benefit, public good that's going to come from a project, regardless of anything else, we won't approve it to proceed. And just to provide a bit of detail around about how that oversight process works, we have a multi-stage risk assessment of all of the research projects done. So at the very early stage, the research team will do a research governance and ethics self-assessment using that UKSA self-assessment toolkit verbatim. We take that and that's what we use to assess it. If at that point we think it's fine, we think it's great, then it moves through to the research oversight subcommittee consideration. And at that point, we'll make a risk assessment using the work that's already been done in the self-assessment and considering other factors as well. And we'll make a decision. And that decision may be, yeah, we think it's fine. You know, the risk is appropriate here, proceed. Or we might say the risk is far too high. Off you go. No, go back and start again. Or if we're at that point where, for example, yes, we can see this is good science, but we're a bit unsure about the public benefit, then what we'll do is take it forward and we'll submit it to external review. And that external review is undertaken by our patient and public advisory panel, which is quite a neat segue to the last part that I'll talk about, which is our patient and public involvement and engagement. So again, what is it that we said? So our framework dictates that the views of the public are considered in light of the data that's used and the perceived benefits of the research. Now, as a commercial organization, the best way that we can do this on a regular and meaningful way is to form our own cohort, our own panel of patients and the public. And so going into the middle and to the latter half of last year, we actively went out and recruited for our patient and public advisory panel. And we've been immensely lucky to form a cohort of 12 patient and public volunteers for very regular and meaningful involvement in not only the projects that we do, but also the wider operation of the real-world data network. And it was critical that they comprised rich lived experience of the types of hospital managed treatment pathways that we study. And this way of operating was fully documented within our protocol and has therefore received HRA approval. We have the support of a research ethics committee to operate this way. That very much addresses the involvement part of PPIE, but we were very aware that engagement is vitally important. So of everyone who applied to be on the panel, we've written back and said, you know, if you were unsuccessful in joining the panel, we would still very much love to keep you involved. So our aim is over the next year, we're going to do more periodic engagement work with them, but also with advocacy groups such as yourself, which is our starting point here today. And just to get a bit more into the detail and to provide a bit more detail about what it is we've said that we must do in relation to PPIE, informing the panel, the nature of the involvement can't be tokenistic. We went for a cohort of 12 because from a commercial perspective, we felt that that was the highest number of people that we could reasonably afford. So all of the involvement that our panel do, we compensate for their time in line with the NIHR sort of standardized costings that they would apply. And 12 also gives us a really decent chance at having quite a diverse cohort. So when we were selecting the members for the panel, we made sure, and I made sure, that it was a really diverse demography in terms of their age, sex, geographic location, and ethnicity. And I think members of my panel would, you know, better place to tell me than me, but I think we did a pretty good job in that. Skipping to the end, this final bit's very, very important for me, and this didn't really come from any established standard as far as I was aware, but it was something I thought was morally important. And it is that we make a commitment that all of the feedback and insights that we get from the panel and also in this session today, we will consider all of it. But what we may not be able to do is implement all of it. And to make that fair, I think the reasonable thing to do is we're very open and honest and feedback regularly to provide information about where insights and feedbacks are provided. We've been able to incorporate it, that really great news story. Yeah, you said this, we did this, but then account for ourselves where we haven't been able to implement something. The reason may not be palatable. It may come down to that old, it's too expensive, it's not commercially viable, but I think it's fair. And we don't shy away, and we try and explain why, as a commercial organization, we make the decisions that we do whilst trying to maintain commercial competence as much as we can. And the very final thing I just wanted to allude to is the types of involvement that our panel do. And it really, really varies. So it can be what I would say quite typical, quite humdrum, which is supporting us with lay summaries. Panel's already done that for one project we're working on at the minute. But it also moves right through to the strategic and operational nature of how Arcturis does its business. So, for example, they will be consulted on where we're applying new novel methods. We've got the government direction that we're going to become an AI superpower. That is going to require significant patient and public involvement and engagement. It will, and if it's something we start to adopt much more in earnest, then we'll be coming to our panel to support us with how we approach implementing that and what are the things we need to consider, right through to particular types of data providers or clients. Sometimes clients are very typical and we think, yep, this is a safe client to work from. And then other times we think we're just not sure. And then we're point of that, just not sure. We will bring our panel in to aid us. We think this is what this company does. Is this someone we should do business with? Do you have any concerns? And we can take that input into our decision making. That is everything I wanted to talk through today. Thank you so much for your patience. There's a little bit of death by PowerPoint, but I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you. That was a heck of a lot to get through in a short amount of time.
Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you for that.